Hello, my name is D.B. Mangum, and I'm a professional storyteller. And I've got some stories about this area that might be a little bit surprising to you, might be a little bit fun. Gather round, fellas, I'll tell you some tales about murder and blueberry pie, and heroes and hells and bottomless wells, lullabies, legends, and lies. Gather round, ladies, come sit at my feet. I'll sing about warm sunny skies. There's mermaids and beans, loving machines, my lullabies, legends, and lies. Lullabies, legends, and lies, and lies. Lullabies, legends, and lies. I'll sing you a song and I'll shuffle along, my lullabies, legends, and lies. I may make you wonder, I may make you smile, I may bring the tears to your eyes. But when I disappear, Lord, you'll wish I was here for lullabies, legends, and lies. So open the bottle and pass a guitar, look in my warm, loving eyes. I'll take you to places you ain't been before, my lullabies, legends, and lies. Lullabies, legends, and lies, and lies. Lullabies, legends, and lies. I'll sing you a song and I'll shuffle along, my lullabies, legends, and lies. I'll sing you a song and I'll shuffle along, my lullabies, legends, and lies. My wife went earlier today to the dentist. That's why I'm a little shaky today. It was quite a scene. She said to the dentist, "Doctor, I need this tooth pulled, and I need it done really quick. We have to get to St. George. So I don't want any Novocaine, no gas. I just want you to get in there, jerk the tooth out, and we'll be on our way." The dentist was impressed. He said, "Ma'am, I've never seen such bravery. That's a bold statement to make. Show me this tooth that you want me to pull." And she grabbed my sleeve and she said, "Honey, show him your tooth." So that's the kind of day I've had. I see a lot of kids in the water. And I've got a warning for you, especially if you're planning to go camping near a lake this summer. Boys and girls, take warning. If you go near the lake, keep your eyes wide open. Look for Sneaky Snake. Now maybe you won't see him, and maybe you won't hear, but he'll sneak up behind you, drink all of your root beer, and then Sneaky Snake goes dancing, wiggling and a hissing. Sneaky Snake goes dancing, giggling and a kissing. Well, I don't like old Sneaky Snake. He laughs too much, you see. When he goes wiggling through the grass, tickles his underneath. Now Sneaky Snake, he drinks root beer, and he just makes me sick. When he is not dancing, he looks just like a stick. Now he doesn't have any arms or legs, you cannot see his ears. And while we are not looking, He's over there drinking beer. And then Sneaky Snake goes dancing, wiggling and a hissing. Sneaky Snake goes dancing, giggling and a kissing. I don't like old Sneaky Snake, he laughs too much, you see. When he goes wiggling through the grass, tickles his underneath. Would you like me to tell you a story about Utah outlaws? Yeah. So picture this. I'm a 12-year-old kid, and I've got something that every 12-year-old boy would only dream of, and I've got it. My dad bought it on a dare, on a bet. A Honda XR75. It's the coolest motorcycle you ever saw in your life. I loved it with all my heart. Now, my family did camping. We camped together with all our uncles and aunts and cousins, and we looked like the Hells Angels when we camped because everybody had motorcycles. And here's the reason we had motorcycles. We're from here. So actually from Enterprise and St. George. So deer hunting season meant meat for the season. It wasn't something we did for sport. Well, those of us, our families that moved to Salt Lake, we found out really quickly that when we came to St. George at deer hunting season, hunting on horseback was a real pain in the neck. So my grandfather and my Uncle Lo got the idea to buy these motorcycles, these Honda Trail 90s. And it was easier to get in and out of the hills when you had a deer. So it kind of evolved from there. By the time I came along and I was 12, I had the coolest little motorcycle you ever saw. Well, my grandparents were my heroes. And I don't know what kind of relationship you have with your grandparents, but my grandparents didn't discipline me. There was a real cordial relationship between them, and I never heard them raise their voice to me. And I'm not saying if your grandparents, or if you as grandparents raise your voice to your grandchildren, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not the way it was in my family. Well, one year when I was 12 and I had this motorcycle, Grandma and Grandpa invited me to go camping with them on Cedar Mountain, about an hour north of here. And they invited just me, which was very unusual, but I was thrilled about it. When we got on the mountain, they started showing me things and telling me stories. Both of them, when they had grown up, had run cattle on Cedar Mountain during the summer. And I could tell it was emotional for them. And my grandpa had been in the CCCs, and he had made the Duck Creek campgrounds, been part of the CCCs that built that campground. And they wanted me to see these things. Well, there was one special place down a dirt road that we pulled into, and Grandma and Grandpa got really quiet, and there were some logs stacked in a rectangle, and I could tell there had been some kind of structure there. And Grandma said to my grandpa, Hank, she said, "Is this the place?" And he kind of wiped his nose with a hanky, and he said, "Yeah, this is it. This is the place." But they didn't have a story to go with that. Well, so one day, Grandpa and I take a ride on our motorcycle. See, he had a Honda 360. There's this old guy in his 60s on this cool motorcycle. And in those days, it wasn't developed up there on Cedar Mountain. And we went to Strawberry Point. And it seemed a long way from Duck Creek Campground. And when you're 12 years old on a motorcycle, it is a long way. And he wanted to tell me about how the CCCs had plowed the road to Strawberry Point and how he had driven the cat. It was kind of fun. And we had granola for lunch. That was before the hippies had discovered it. But it made a good motorcycle lunch. Pull it out of your pack and have granola. And then he said to me something that no one had ever said to me in my life. No one had ever suggested this. I was amazed. He said, "Do you know the way back to camp?" And I said, "I think so." He said, "Then you lead the way." That blew my little mind. I jumped on that Honda 75 like I was a rodeo rider. Kicked that thing into life, and I tore down the road as fast as I could go. It was the coolest moment of my life. I was jumping over every little bump I could find and sliding into the turns, and I was going as fast as I could make that little bike go. I was thinking if my friends could see me now. It was so great. It was a moment I'll never forget. When I saw the turnoff to Duck Creek Campground, I knew I was there, and I pulled in up by Grandma and Grandpa's trailer, And I stopped and turned off my bike, and I heard something I knew I shouldn't hear. Silence. And Grandma heard it too. And she didn't say anything to me. She just looked up from her book and then looked back down and kept reading. And I stood there at attention by my little motorcycle for what seemed like hours. When down the trail, I could hear the sound of Grandpa's motorcycle. And I looked around, and he's flailing through the trees like he's going to crash. And he pulls into camp and turns off his bike, jumps off, pulls his helmet off, almost pulls his head off with his helmet. And he screams, "Where's that dang kid? That dang, spoiled, rotten, stupid, inconsiderate kid?" And I was frozen with fear. And he marches over to me and he pokes his finger in my forehead. He says, "This dirty, rotten, inconsiderate, spoiled, rotten kid." Turns to my grandma and he says, "Runs off, leaves me behind, no thought for me. What if he'd have lost his way? What if he'd have been in an accident? What if I'd have been in an accident? What's the matter with this dirty, rotten, good-for-nothing kid?" And he turned to me and he poked his finger in my forehead again. He said, "What's the matter with this dirty, rotten, stinking, no-good kid?" And my grandma says, "Hank, you've had your say." And he looked at her, and he looked at me, and he stormed off. He went inside the trailer house and he slammed the door. Well, I did what most 12-year-old boys would do. I sulked, and I had a little Spring Bar Kirkham scout tent, a little green one, 2-man tent. Spent a lot of time in there sulking. We were there for about another 4 or 5 days, and I didn't say anything to anybody. When it was time to go, I helped them pack up, and we were headed to Enterprise for a family reunion, 1976. And everybody was going to be there. It was really exciting. My folks and our family met us there. Well, everybody noticed that I was sulking, and they would say, "What's the matter with Daryl?" And Grandpa would say, "Well, Daryl's mad at me." And that really hurt, because that wasn't true. He was mad at me. Well, I kept up the sulking routine for a long time. We would go to Grandma and Grandpa's on Sunday afternoons, and I would always sit in another room and not talk to anybody. I carried on this up for a long time, did it really well. I was sitting at the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon. It was one of those aluminum and formica jobs that all your grandparents had, and they had a toothpick dispenser that you've all seen that's spring-loaded, and when you hit it, it's got a dome on the top, and you try to play with it, see if you could hit it without stabbing your hand. I was playing with the toothpick dispenser, and Grandpa came in and sat down at the table with me without saying anything. And I turned and looked at him. He wiped his nose, and he told this amazing story. He said, "When my dad, Ben Franklin Mangum, was about your age, about 10 years old, 12 years old, he used to tend the cattle for the family up on Cedar Mountain. He had a little cabin, and you've been there. And he would take care of not just his dad's cattle, but the whole community. They had their summer range up there, and he would watch the cattle. And he was no older than you, and he did it all by himself. Didn't have his mama or his daddy or his grandpa to take care of him. What do you think about that?" And I answered the way a 12-year-old should. I shrugged my shoulders. And he said, "Well, he did that from May till September without any help or supervision. He had his cabin with a store of food in it that he could fend for himself. He had a single-shot Sharps rifle in case he needed it for protection. And from May to September, he lived there all alone, taking care of all this cattle. What do you think about that?" And I shrugged my shoulders. So one night he was coming in from his ride, setting up, getting ready to make dinner and go to bed. And 3 guys came down the trail on their horses. And that wasn't unusual, because guys came up to check on their cattle all the time. These guys were different. See, it's not the way, it wasn't back then in the 1890s, it wasn't the way we see it in the movies. People didn't carry guns, sidearms, but these 3 guys had sidearms. And my great-grandpa Ben, he knew there was a risk of people trying to rustle the cattle. And he didn't know what to do, because he knew he didn't have a way to protect the cattle, and these guys looked vicious. And he wasn't sure what to do. And my grandpa looked at me and said, "What would you have done?" And I shrugged my shoulders. He said, "Well, these guys came up and they didn't even unsaddle their horses. They just went into the cabin. And Dad, he said, he took his horse and he put it in a little lean-to. There was a lean-to next to the cabin. And then he looked at the cabin, and he knew these guys expected him to run away. But he couldn't, because he was trusted to take care of his cattle. So he went over and went inside the cabin, and these guys had got into his food stores and had made dinner. And when they saw him, they laughed. And one of them went over to the fire and served him up a plate and handed it to him. And then they all laughed like it was a really good joke. So Ben took the plate and he went outside, and he knew he couldn't run. He had to do what he had to do to take care of the cattle. So he went into the lean-to with the horse and he bedded down there for the night. And when he woke up in the morning, there was smoke coming out of the chimney of the cabin. And he walked back over and went inside. And this time these three guys didn't laugh. They had expected him to be long gone. He went over to the fire this time and served up breakfast to himself. Then he went out and he got his horse saddled and he had his Sharps rifle on the saddle. And he just decided that he would just go out and be with the cattle. If these guys were going to kill him and take the cattle, well then that was what was going to happen. But there wasn't anything he could do about it. But he wouldn't run. So pretty soon he heard these guys coming out and they got on their horses. And he just stood there in the saddle, gripping his rifle till his knuckles were turning white. And he heard them just kind of slowly going down the trail. One of them turned his horse around and came back right behind my Grandpa Ben. And he was shaking. And the guy said, "Hey kid, anybody comes this way looking for Butch Cassidy, you tell him you ain't seen nothing, you understand?" And Ben nodded his head. And then this man reached in his vest pocket and took out a Morgan silver dollar and flipped it through the air. And Ben caught it. And the guy turned his horse and disappeared into the trees. Well, I was sitting there lost in this story. It was the greatest story I'd ever heard. I was amazed to think I was part of the story, and I'd been right where this had happened, and I was related to this guy. And I looked up, and I saw something I've never seen before. My grandpa was crying, and he was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. And he reached in his pocket and pulled out another handkerchief. And you know, if you have a grandpa in the 1970s, they do a lot of nose blowing. Didn't surprise me. But he unfolded this handkerchief and pulled out an 1892 Morgan silver dollar that looked brand new. And he put it in my hand. And he said, "My dad and I had kind of an understanding all throughout his life. And I want to have that with you." So do you understand? And I nodded my head. And he folded it up in the napkin and we put it in my pocket. And he said, "Good." He said, "Grandma's Toyota," that's Utah talk for Toyota, "has a brake problem and I got to fix it. So come out to the garage and help me." And I followed him outside. And I'm still following him today in many ways. That's a true story from this very area.